Fired secretary saves boss's life in accident only to discover he's been in love with her for years. The smell of gasoline mixed with rain. The sound of metal groaning against asphalt. And Amira Smith's hands, steady, capable hands that had typed 1,000,000 emails and organized 1,000 meetings, now trembling as they searched for a pulse on Jonathan Stone's bloodied forehead. "Stay with me," she whispered, her voice breaking as she pulled him from the wreckage of his Mercedes. "Please, Jonathan, stay with me." His eyes fluttered open, unfocused and dazed, but when they found her face in the dim streetlight, something shifted. Not recognition, something deeper. Something that had been buried for 3 long years beneath professional smiles and careful distance. "Amira?" His voice was barely a breath. Why are you here?" She should have been miles away by now. Should have been home, crying into her sister's shoulder about losing the job that kept them afloat. Instead, she was here, rain soaking through her blazer, cradling the head of the man who had shattered her world just 2 hours earlier. But what Amira didn't know, what she couldn't have known as sirens wailed in the distance, was that inside Jonathan's briefcase, scattered among the broken glass, lay 3 years' worth of emails he'd never sent. Love letters disguised as business correspondence. Confessions typed at midnight and deleted before dawn. The truth he'd been too afraid to speak. The truth that he hadn't fired her to hurt her. He'd fired her because Richard Webb had given him an ultimatum: choose between his company and the woman he loved. And Jonathan Stone, CEO of a billion-dollar empire, had chosen her. He'd chosen to lose everything rather than let Richard destroy the only person who had ever made him feel truly alive. But how do you tell someone you've loved them in silence for 3 years? How do you explain that every professional interaction was an exercise in self-control? That every time she smiled at another man, it felt like a physical blow to his chest? What would you do if you discovered the person who fired you had been secretly in love with you for years? Let me tell you how it all began, with a Tuesday morning that started like any other, but ended with 2 hearts finally colliding after years of orbiting each other in careful, agonizing silence. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and join our Dear Love Diaries family. Your special place in this community of heartfelt stories is waiting for you. These passionate journeys of souls connecting against all odds have brought together thousands of beautiful hearts just like yours. Make sure you hit the bell too, so you'll know immediately when a new story unfolds in our diary of love. 3 weeks earlier, Amira Smith stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of Stone Industries' 42nd floor, watching the city wake up below. At 32, she commanded this executive suite with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned every inch of respect through sheer competence. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman who belonged here, tailored navy dress that hugged her curves perfectly, natural hair styled in an elegant updo that had taken her sister Maya an hour to perfect that morning. "Your 8:30 is here, Mr. Stone," she said into her headset, her voice carrying that professional warmth that had made her indispensable to Jonathan Stone for 3 years. Behind her, she could hear the familiar rustle of his newspaper, the soft clink of his coffee cup against its saucer. "Send them in," came his reply, and Amira felt that little flutter in her stomach that she'd trained herself to ignore. His voice, deep, measured, with just a hint of the Boston accent he'd tried to shed after Harvard, still did things to her that had no place in a professional relationship. She turned from the window, her heels clicking against the marble floor as she walked toward the massive oak doors that led to Jonathan's office. Through the glass panels, she could see him at his desk, shirt sleeves rolled up, dark hair slightly mussed from running his fingers through it. At 38, Jonathan Stone commanded attention without trying, 6'2" of lean muscle wrapped in expensive suits, with storm gray eyes that seemed to see everything and reveal nothing. Except sometimes, when he thought she wasn't looking, those eyes would soften. Sometimes, when their fingers brushed during document exchanges, she'd catch a flash of something that made her breath catch. But then the moment would pass, and they'd return to their careful dance of professional distance. The morning progressed like hundreds before it. Amira fielded calls, managed schedules, and ensured that Jonathan's world ran with clockwork precision. She brought him his preferred lunch, grilled salmon with steamed vegetables from the restaurant downstairs, and noticed he barely touched it. Lately, he'd been distracted, wound tighter than usual. "Mr. Stone," she ventured, standing in his doorway with the afternoon's correspondence. "You seem stressed. Is everything all right?" He looked up from the contract he'd been staring at for 20 minutes, and for a moment, his careful mask slipped. She saw exhaustion there, and something that looked like longing. "Just some business complications, Amira. Nothing for you to worry about." But the way he said her name, like he was tasting something precious, made her pulse quicken. She stepped closer to his desk, close enough to catch the scent of his cologne mixed with the subtle warmth of his skin. "If there's anything I can do to help." She began, reaching across his desk to straighten a stack of papers that didn't need straightening. Their fingers brushed, and the contact sent electricity shooting up her arm. Jonathan's breath caught audibly. For 3 heartbeats, they stayed frozen like that, her hand half covering his, both pretending not to notice the way the air between them had suddenly charged with possibility. Then Jonathan pulled his hand away, clearing his throat. "That'll be all, Ms. Smith." Ms. Smith. He only called her that when he was trying to rebuild the walls between them. Amira stepped back, professional smile firmly in place, and nodded. "Of course, Mr. Stone." But as she turned to leave, she missed the way Jonathan's hands clenched into fists on his desk, or how his jaw tightened with the effort of not calling her back. From his position near the elevator bank, James Porter watched the interaction with the knowing eyes of someone who'd been Jonathan Stone's driver and confidant for 15 years. At 62, James had seen his boss through business triumphs and personal heartbreaks, but he'd never seen him as torn up as he'd been these past few months. "Afternoon, Ms. Smith," James greeted as Amira passed his post by the elevators. "Hi, James. How's Margaret doing?" Amira's genuine smile, the one she reserved for people she truly cared about, transformed her face. "Much better, thank you for asking. Those flowers you sent meant the world to her." This was exactly what drove Jonathan crazy, James thought. Amira's natural warmth, the way she remembered that his wife had been in the hospital, how she'd sent flowers without being asked. She cared about people, really cared, in a way that was rare in their world of corporate politics and calculated relationships. James had watched Jonathan fall in love with her, bit by agonizing bit, over 3 years. He'd seen the way his boss's entire demeanor changed when Amira walked into a room. How Jonathan had started working later just to have more time with her. How he'd memorized her coffee order, her preferred lunch spots, the way she bit her lip when she was concentrating. But James had also watched Jonathan torture himself, convinced that his feelings were inappropriate, that Amira deserved better than a boss who couldn't separate business from personal desires. What Jonathan didn't realize, what his guilt and self-doubt blinded him to, was the way Amira's eyes followed him across rooms, how her breath quickened when he stood close, how she'd started wearing the colors he'd mentioned liking. The elevator arrived with a soft ding, and Amira stepped inside, giving James one last smile before the doors closed. Through the glass walls of Jonathan's office, James could see his boss watching the elevator numbers, tracking Amira's descent to the parking garage. That evening, Amira sat in her small but carefully decorated apartment in Brooklyn, helping her younger sister Maya with homework while dinner simmered on the stove. At 28, Maya was a single mother working 2 jobs to support her 6-year-old daughter, Zoe. When Maya's ex-boyfriend had left them with nothing but debt, Amira had stepped in without question, using her substantial salary to keep their small family afloat. "Aunt Mira, why do you look sad?" Zoe asked, looking up from her coloring book with the unsettling perceptiveness that 6-year-olds sometimes possessed. Amira forced a smile, smoothing Zoe's curly hair. "I'm not sad, baby. Just thinking about work." "Is it about the prince?" Zoe asked innocently. "The prince?" Maya looked up from her textbooks with raised eyebrows. Amira felt heat rise in her cheeks. Zoe calls Mr. Stone the prince because of his fancy office. Because he lives in a tower like in fairy tales, Zoe explained seriously. And Aunt Mira gets that dreamy look when she talks about him, like the princesses do. Out of the mouths of babes, Maya murmured, grinning at her sister's obvious discomfort. It's not like that, Amira protested, but even as she said it, she knew it was a lie. It was exactly like that, and it was getting harder to pretend otherwise. Later that night, after Maya and Zoe had gone to bed, Amira sat by her bedroom window, looking out at the Manhattan skyline. Somewhere out there, in his penthouse overlooking Central Park, Jonathan was probably working late as usual. Did he ever think about her the way she thought about him? Did he ever wonder what it would be like to close the distance between them, to see what lay beneath all those careful professional smiles? She thought about the moment earlier that day when their hands had touched. The way his pupils had dilated, how his breathing had changed. There had been something there, something real and electric and impossible to ignore. But he was Jonathan Stone, billionaire CEO, her boss, a man who could have any woman he wanted. And she was just his secretary, no matter how much respect she'd earned or how indispensable she'd made herself. The gap between their worlds felt insurmountable. What Amira didn't know was that 40 floors above the city, Jonathan Stone stood at his own window, looking out at the same view and thinking about her. In his safe, hidden behind a Monet that was worth more than most people's houses, sat a manila folder containing printouts of every email he'd almost sent her. Love letters disguised as business correspondence. Confessions that started professional and dissolved into poetry. He pulled out his phone, scrolling to her contact information. His thumb hovered over the call button as it had dozens of times before. But what would he say? How could he risk everything they'd built together for the possibility of something more? The next morning brought gray skies and an unusual tension that seemed to permeate the entire 42nd floor. Jonathan had been in meetings since 7 a.m., and the tight set of his shoulders told Amira that whatever was happening wasn't good. At 11:30, Richard Webb arrived. Amira had always disliked Jonathan's business rival, though she'd been careful never to let it show. Richard was everything Jonathan wasn't: flashy, predatory, with cold eyes that seemed to undress every woman he met. At 45, he ran Webb Enterprises with the same ruthless efficiency he'd once used to steal Jonathan's college girlfriend and his first major client. Ms. Smith, Richard smiled as he approached her desk, but there was nothing warm about it. "You're looking lovely as always." "Mr. Webb," she replied coolly. "Mr. Stone is expecting you. Please go right in." But Richard lingered, leaning against her desk in a way that invaded her personal space. "You know, Amira, may I call you Amira? I've always wondered what it would be like to work with someone as talented as you." The way he said talented made her skin crawl. "I'm very happy where I am, thank you." "Are you?" Richard's smile sharpened. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're wasting your considerable assets on someone who'll never appreciate them properly." Before Amira could respond, Jonathan's office door opened with enough force to rattle the glass panels. "Webb." Jonathan's voice could have cut steel. "My office. Now." The look he gave Richard was pure ice, but when his eyes found Amira's, they warmed with something that looked like possessive concern. "Ms. Smith, please hold my calls." "Of course, Mr. Stone." Richard pushed off from her desk with deliberate slowness, his fingers trailing across the surface in a gesture that made Jonathan's jaw clench visibly. "We'll continue this conversation later, Amira." The office door closed behind them, but even through the glass, Amira could see the tension in both men's postures. Jonathan stood behind his desk like a fortress, while Richard lounged in the chair across from him, apparently enjoying whatever he was saying. 20 minutes later, Richard emerged looking satisfied in a way that made Amira's stomach turn. He paused at her desk again, but this time Jonathan appeared in his doorway, silent but radiating enough menace to make Richard think better of whatever he'd been planning to say. Always a pleasure, Ms. Smith, Richard said instead, then disappeared into the elevator. Jonathan remained in his doorway, watching until the elevator doors closed. When he finally looked at Amira, she saw something in his expression that she'd never seen before: defeat. "Mr. Stone? Is everything all right?" He studied her for a long moment, as if memorizing her face. "Amira, could you come into my office, please?" The use of her first name sent warning bells through her system. Jonathan was always careful to maintain professional distance in the office, calling her Ms. Smith except in moments of extreme stress or emotion. She followed him into his office, noting how he didn't close the door behind them, another departure from his usual protocol. He moved to stand behind his desk, but didn't sit, his hands gripping the leather chair like an anchor. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me," he said, his voice strained. "Of course. Are you happy here? In this job, I mean. Do you feel fulfilled?" The question caught her off guard. Yes, Mr. Stone. I love working here. I love." She caught herself before she could say, "working with you. I love the challenge, the responsibility. I feel like I'm making a real contribution." Something flickered across his face, pain, maybe, or regret. "And if you had other opportunities? Better opportunities?" "I don't understand. Are you asking if I'm looking for another job?" "Because I'm not. I have no intention of leaving Stone Industries." Jonathan closed his eyes briefly, as if gathering strength for something difficult. When he opened them, they were shuttered, businesslike. "Amira, I'm going to have to let you go." The words hit her like a physical blow. She actually stepped backward, one hand reaching for the chair behind her for support. What? Your position is being eliminated. Effective immediately." His voice was completely flat now, devoid of the warmth she'd grown accustomed to hearing when he said her name. "But why? What did I do wrong? My performance reviews have all been excellent. Just last month you said. This isn't about your performance." He pulled out an envelope from his desk drawer, his movements mechanical. "This is your severance package. It's generous. More than generous." Amira stared at the envelope in his outstretched hand as if it contained a snake. "I don't want your money, Jonathan. I want to know why you're doing this." The use of his first name made him flinch, but his expression didn't change. "It's a business decision. Nothing more. A business decision." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "After 3 years, that's all I am to you? A business decision?" For just a moment, his mask slipped, and she saw anguish in his eyes so profound it took her breath away. But then the shutters came down again, and he was Jonathan Stone, CEO, nothing more. "James will escort you to collect your personal items. The severance package includes excellent references. You won't have trouble finding another position." Amira felt tears threatening, but she refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of him. She drew herself up to her full height, called on every ounce of dignity her foster care upbringing had taught her. "Keep your references, Mr. Stone. And keep your severance." She didn't take the envelope. "I'll collect my things and be gone within the hour." She turned toward the door, then paused without looking back. "For what it's worth, I thought we were friends. I thought I meant more to you than this." She didn't wait for a response. Couldn't wait, because if she stayed another second, she was going to break down completely. Behind her, she heard the soft thud of the envelope hitting the desk, followed by what sounded like Jonathan's chair being shoved backward with violent force. But she didn't turn around. She walked out of his office, out of his life, with her head held high and her heart breaking into a million pieces. Have you ever worked closely with someone who made your heart race but you couldn't say anything? Share your story in the comments below. I love hearing about the connections that change everything. James Porter was waiting by her desk with an empty box, his kind eyes full of sympathy. I'm sorry, Ms. Smith. I truly am. Did you know? She asked, pulling photos and personal items from her desk drawers with mechanical precision. I knew something was coming. I didn't know what. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Around her, the office had gone unnaturally quiet. Other employees were pretending to work while watching her pack up 3 years of her life. As she placed the last item, a small succulent Maya had given her for luck, into the box, she became aware of someone standing nearby. She looked up to find Lillian Stone, Jonathan's mother, watching her with undisguised satisfaction. At 65, Lillian Stone was a force of nature. Silver-haired, imperiously dressed, with the kind of quiet power that came from generations of old money. She'd never approved of her son's close working relationship with his secretary, and she wasn't bothering to hide her pleasure at this development. Ms. Smith, Lillian said coolly. How unfortunate that things didn't work out. Amira looked her directly in the eye. Yes, it is. Though perhaps it's for the best. These close working relationships can become complicated. Inappropriate, even. The implication was clear, and it stung. But Amira refused to give this woman the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. There was nothing inappropriate about my relationship with your son, Mrs. Stone. I was a professional employee who did her job well. Nothing more. Lillian's smile was sharp as a blade. Of course, dear. I'm sure that's exactly how you saw it. James stepped forward then, his protective instincts finally overriding his discretion. Mrs. Stone, if you'll excuse us, I need to escort Ms. Smith to the parking garage. The elevator ride down was silent except for the soft mechanical humming of the machinery. James carried her box while Amira stood rigidly upright, staring at the floor numbers as they descended. 42, 41, 40, each number taking her further away from the life she'd built, the man she'd. No. She wouldn't think about that. Whatever she'd thought she'd seen in Jonathan's eyes, whatever moments of connection she'd imagined, they'd obviously been one-sided. He'd made his feelings, or lack thereof, crystal clear. Ms. Smith, James said quietly as they reached the parking garage. Whatever this is about, it's not what you think. She looked at him sharply. What do you mean? I can't say more. But Mr. Stone, he's not himself lately. He's been under tremendous pressure, and sometimes good people make choices they regret when they're backed into corners. Are you saying he'll change his mind? James hesitated. I'm saying that sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones fighting the hardest to protect us. Before Amira could ask what he meant, her phone buzzed with a text message. David Summers' name flashed on the screen, and she felt her stomach sink further. Her ex-boyfriend had been persistent in trying to win her back, and this was the last complication she needed today. Ms. Smith? James was watching her with concern. It's nothing. Just, thank you, James. For everything. You've always been kind to me. Take care of yourself. And, keep your phone on. Just in case. She nodded, though she had no idea what he meant. As she drove out of the Stone Industries parking garage for the last time, rain began to spatter against her windshield. The gray sky seemed to mirror her mood perfectly. Behind her, 42 floors up, Jonathan Stone stood at his window watching her car disappear into traffic. His hands were pressed flat against the glass, and for the first time in 3 years, he didn't care who might see the raw emotion on his face. He'd done what Richard Webb had demanded. He'd chosen his company over his heart, his empire over the only woman who had ever made him feel truly alive. The price of keeping Stone Industries, and keeping Amira safe from Richard's vindictive schemes, was losing her forever. But as her taillights faded into the distance, Jonathan Stone realized he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. Chapter 2. The rain that had started as a light drizzle when Amira left Stone Industries had turned into a full downpour by the time she reached her apartment building. She sat in her car for 10 minutes, engine running, windshield wipers battling the storm, trying to gather the strength to face Maya and explain how their world had just fallen apart. 3 blocks away, in a high-end restaurant overlooking the river, Jonathan Stone stared at his untouched dinner while Richard Webb smiled like a cat who'd caught the canary. "I have to admit, Jonathan, I didn't think you'd actually do it," Richard said, cutting into his steak with obvious satisfaction. "But then again, you always were more sentimental than smart." Jonathan's grip on his wine glass tightened. "You got what you wanted, Richard. Ms. Smith is gone. Now leave her alone." "Oh, but that's where you're wrong." Richard leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying himself. "You see, firing her was just the beginning. I have plans for Miss Amira Smith. Big plans." "What kind of plans?" "The kind that involve a very generous job offer and a very personal working relationship." Richard's smile turned predatory. "She's wasted on filing and phone calls, don't you think? A woman like that has so many other talents." Jonathan's chair scraped against the floor as he stood abruptly. "Stay away from her." "Or what? You'll fire her again?" Richard laughed. "Face it, Jonathan. You chose your company over the woman you love. That makes you smart, but it also makes you weak. And weak men don't get to make demands. This isn't over. No, it's not. In fact, it's just beginning. Sweet dreams, Jonathan. Try not to think about what I'll be doing with your precious Amira." Jonathan left the restaurant without another word, his hands shaking with rage and something that felt dangerously close to panic. He'd thought firing Amira would protect her from Richard's schemes. Instead, he'd served her up on a silver platter. The rain was coming down in sheets now, turning the city streets into rivers. Jonathan's driver had the night off. He'd told James he needed to think, needed the solitude of driving himself. But as he navigated the increasingly treacherous roads, his mind wasn't on traffic conditions. It was on Amira. The way she'd looked at him when he'd told her she was fired. The hurt in her voice when she'd said she thought they were friends. The dignity with which she'd walked away, even as her world crumbled around her. He'd been in love with her for 3 years. 3 years of stolen glances and careful conversations. 3 years of typing emails he'd never send, of lying awake at night imagining what it would be like to hold her, to kiss her, to tell her how he felt. And now it was over. All of it. Gone. His phone rang, cutting through his spiraling thoughts. Richard's name flashed on the dashboard display. "What do you want?" "Just thought you should know. I'm heading over to Brooklyn to pay your former employee a visit. Console her in her time of need. You understand." The phone went dead, leaving Jonathan staring at the screen in horror. Richard had Amira's address. Of course he did, he made it his business to know everything about his enemy's weaknesses. Jonathan yanked the steering wheel to the right, tires skidding on the wet asphalt as he took the turn toward Brooklyn. He had to get there first. Had to warn her, protect her, something. But as he pressed harder on the accelerator, the rain seemed to intensify. The roads were slick, visibility was nearly zero, and his emotional state was making him reckless. He was going too fast, taking corners too sharp, but all he could think about was Richard Webb knocking on Amira's door. Meanwhile, in her small apartment, Amira was trying to explain to Maya why their comfortable life was about to disappear. Fired? Maya stared at her sister in disbelief. But why? You're the best assistant he's ever had. You practically run that company. Apparently not, Amira said, forcing her voice to remain steady. He said my position was being eliminated. That's corporate speak for, I don't want to tell you the real reason. Maya reached across the kitchen table to squeeze her sister's hand. What aren't you telling me? Amira closed her eyes. She couldn't explain about Richard Webb's visit, about the way Jonathan had looked at her in those final moments. She couldn't put into words the feeling that there was more to this story than a simple downsizing. I think. She began, then stopped. How could she say it out loud? That she thought her boss, the man she'd been half in love with for 3 years, might have fired her because their relationship was becoming too complicated? That every professional interaction had been charged with an undercurrent of attraction neither of them could acknowledge? You think what? I think maybe I was reading too much into things. Maybe I thought we had a connection that wasn't really there. Maya studied her sister's face with the insight of someone who'd known her their entire lives. You're in love with him. It wasn't a question, and Amira didn't bother denying it. It doesn't matter. Whatever I thought I felt, whatever I thought he might feel. I was obviously wrong. Her phone buzzed on the table between them. David Summers' name appeared on the screen again, and this time she answered it, if only to have something else to focus on. Amira, thank God. I've been trying to reach you all day. Hi, David. I'm sorry, it's been a difficult day. I heard about what happened at Stone Industries. News travels fast in corporate circles. Of course it did. Her humiliation was probably already making the rounds of Manhattan's business elite. I wanted to call and tell you that this could be a blessing in disguise, David continued. I've been promoted to senior partner at Morrison & Associates. We could use someone with your skills, and I'd love to work together again. In fact, why don't I come over so we can discuss it in person? David, I appreciate the offer, but tonight isn't a good time. Come on, Amira. We were good together, you know that. This could be a fresh start for both of us. Before she could respond, there was a knock at her apartment door. Maya's eyebrows rose. Are you expecting someone? Amira shook her head, but her heart started beating faster. Something about the authoritative rhythm of the knock was familiar. David, I have to go. Someone's at my door. Perfect timing. That's probably me, I'm downstairs in the lobby. Amira felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm outside. You're here. I didn't invite you over. Surprise. Buzz me up, sweetheart. We have a lot to talk about. The endearment made her skin crawl, but before she could tell him to leave, the knocking at her door became more insistent. Urgent. I have to go, David. We'll talk another time. She hung up and moved toward the door, Maya close behind her. Through the peephole, she saw a figure in an expensive coat, rain-soaked and agitated. But it wasn't David. It was Richard Webb. Amira, open up. I know you're in there. Her blood turned to ice. How did he know where she lived? And why was he here? Who is it? Maya whispered. Someone from work. Someone I don't want to talk to. The knocking continued, becoming more aggressive. Come on, Amira. I have a proposition for you. A very generous proposition. Maya moved toward the landline. I'm calling the police. But before she could dial, another voice echoed through the hallway, one that made Amira's heart stop. Webb. Get away from that door. Jonathan. The knocking stopped. Through the thin walls, Amira could hear voices in the hallway, rising in anger. She couldn't make out the words, but the tension was unmistakable. Then she heard footsteps moving away from her door, followed by the sound of the elevator. But one set of footsteps remained. A soft knock, gentler than before. Amira? It's me. It's Jonathan. Her hand hovered over the deadbolt. Part of her wanted to pretend she wasn't home, to let him think she'd already moved on with her life. But a larger part, the part that had been in love with him for 3 years, couldn't resist. She opened the door. Jonathan Stone stood in her hallway, his expensive suit soaked through, his usually perfect hair plastered to his forehead. He looked like he'd been through hell, and when his eyes met hers, she saw desperation there that took her breath away. "What are you doing here?" she asked, proud that her voice remained steady. "I came to warn you about Richard." He was. Jonathan's eyes moved past her to Maya, who was standing protectively close. "May I come in? Please. I need to explain." Every rational part of her mind screamed at her to close the door. This man had destroyed her life just hours ago. He had no right to show up at her home, looking vulnerable and desperate and heartbreakingly beautiful. But she stepped aside and let him in. Jonathan entered her small apartment like a man walking into a foreign country. His eyes took in the cozy living room with its mismatched furniture and family photos, the homework spread across the kitchen table, the evidence of a life lived on love rather than luxury. "Maya, this is Jonathan Stone. My former boss. Mr. Stone, this is my sister Maya." Maya's expression could have frozen lava. "The one who fired you." "Yes," Jonathan said simply. "The one who made the biggest mistake of his life." The admission hung in the air between them, charged with possibility and pain. "Why are you here?" Amira asked again. "And why was Richard Webb trying to get into my apartment?" Jonathan's jaw tightened. "Because I'm an idiot. I thought firing you would protect you from him. Instead, I made you vulnerable." "Protect me from what?" "Richard has been pressuring me for months, trying to force a merger between our companies. When I refused, he started looking for leverage. He found out about." Jonathan's eyes met hers, and she saw him make a decision. "He found out about my feelings for you." The words hit her like a physical blow. "Your feelings?" "He threatened to destroy you, Amira. Your reputation, your career, your family's financial security. He said if I didn't agree to the merger, he'd make sure you never worked in this city again. And he had the connections to do it." Maya was looking between them like she was watching a tennis match, but Amira only had eyes for Jonathan. "So you fired me to protect me?" "I thought if I removed you from the equation, he'd leave you alone. I was wrong." Jonathan's voice was raw with regret. "He sees you as a way to hurt me, and firing you just made you an easier target." "A way to hurt you?" Amira's voice was barely a whisper. "Why would hurting me affect you?" For 3 years, they'd danced around this moment. 3 years of careful conversations and professional boundaries. 3 years of pretending that the electricity between them was just imagination. Jonathan took a step closer, close enough that she could see the rain droplets on his eyelashes, could smell his cologne mixed with the clean scent of the storm. "Because I'm in love with you," he said simply. "I have been for 3 years. And Richard Webb knows it." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Chapter 3. Amira felt the floor disappear beneath her feet. 3 years of wondering, of questioning every glance and casual touch, of telling herself she was imagining the tension between them, and he'd felt it too. "You're in love with me," she repeated, as if saying the words might make them real. Desperately, Jonathan said, his voice breaking slightly. "Completely. From the first day you walked into my office and reorganized my entire filing system without being asked. From the moment you looked me in the eye and told me my coffee was terrible and offered to find a better supplier." Maya cleared her throat. "I'm going to check on Zoe," she said diplomatically, disappearing toward the bedrooms and leaving them alone. "Jonathan, I know it's wrong," he continued, words spilling out like he'd been holding them back for years. "I know I'm your boss, that there's a power imbalance, that I have no right to feel this way about you. But I couldn't help it. Every day, watching you, working with you, seeing how brilliant and kind and beautiful you are, it was torture." "You think it was only torture for you?" The words escaped before she could stop them. Jonathan went very still. "What?" Amira's heart was hammering against her ribs. This was it, the moment she could either retreat behind safe, professional boundaries or step off the cliff into the unknown. Do you think you were the only one struggling? The only one lying awake at night thinking about what it would be like if things were different? Hope flickered in his storm-gray eyes. Amira. I've been in love with you for 3 years too, Jonathan. 3 years of telling myself it was inappropriate, that I was reading too much into things, that a man like you could never. She swallowed hard. That a man like you could never see me as anything more than his secretary. They stood there in her small living room, the truth finally naked between them, the rain beating against the windows like a percussion soundtrack to their revelation. Jonathan took another step closer. How could you think that? How could you not know that you're the most extraordinary woman I've ever met? Because you never said anything. Because you kept everything so professional, so careful. Because I was terrified, he interrupted. Terrified that if I told you how I felt, you'd think I was taking advantage of my position. Terrified that I'd lose you completely. So instead you fired me. The words hung between them, a reminder that despite these confessions, he had still chosen to hurt her rather than trust her with the truth. Jonathan's face crumpled. God, Amira, I'm so sorry. I panicked. When Richard threatened you, when he said he'd destroy everything you'd worked for, I couldn't think straight. All I could think about was protecting you, even if it meant losing you. You should have talked to me. You should have trusted me enough to let me make my own choices. You're right. You're absolutely right, and I'll regret that decision for the rest of my life. He reached toward her, then let his hand fall. Can you ever forgive me? Before she could answer, her phone rang. David's name flashed on the screen, and she rejected the call without hesitation. But it rang again immediately. I should take this, she said reluctantly. He's been calling all evening. Jonathan's expression darkened. David Summers? You know him? Corporate lawyer. Your ex-boyfriend. The words came out flat, controlled, but she could see the jealousy burning in his eyes. Yes, and he's offering me a job. Which, given my current employment status, I should probably consider. She answered the phone, putting it on speaker without really thinking about why. Amira, finally. Look, I'm still downstairs. The doorman won't let me up, but we really need to talk about this job opportunity. David, I told you tonight isn't good. Come on, sweetheart. 5 minutes. I promise you'll want to hear what I have to offer. Jonathan's hands clenched into fists at the endearment, and Amira felt a flicker of feminine satisfaction at his obvious reaction. I'm not alone, she said firmly. And I've told you I need time to think. Not alone? Who's there? She looked at Jonathan, something reckless rising in her chest. Jonathan Stone. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Your boss is there? The one who fired you? Former boss, Amira corrected. And it's complicated. Amira, whatever he's told you, whatever promises he's made, men like Stone don't change. They use people and throw them away when it's convenient. Don't let him manipulate you. Jonathan stepped forward, and Amira could see he was struggling not to grab the phone. David, I appreciate your concern, but my personal life is none of your business. We'll talk about the job opportunity later. Wait, don't hang up. I'm coming up. No, you're not. The doorman's distracted. I'm in the elevator now. The line went dead, and Amira stared at her phone in disbelief. He's coming up here uninvited after I told him not to? Jonathan was already moving toward the door. Not if I have anything to say about it. Jonathan, wait. But he was already opening her apartment door, stepping into the hallway just as the elevator doors opened. David Summers emerged, tall, conventionally handsome, with the kind of aggressive confidence that had once attracted her and now just seemed predatory. Stone. David's voice was cold as he took in Jonathan's rain-soaked appearance. Interesting timing. Summers. Jonathan's tone could have cut glass. Turn around and get back in that elevator. I don't think so. Amira and I have business to discuss. Amira told you she wasn't available tonight. That should have been the end of the conversation. David stepped closer, and Amira could see this was about to escalate quickly. She moved into the hallway between them. Both of you, stop it. David, I told you not to come up here. You need to leave. Not until we talk. David's eyes moved between her and Jonathan, and his expression turned calculating. Although I'm starting to understand why you're not thinking clearly. He's gotten to you, hasn't he? Made you think this is about more than just business? My relationship with Jonathan is none of your concern. Relationship? David laughed harshly. Sweetheart, men like him don't have relationships with women like us. They have affairs. Diversions. And when they're done playing, they move on to someone from their own social circle. Jonathan stepped forward, his control finally snapping. Get out. Now. Or what? You'll fire me too? The mockery in David's voice was the last straw. Jonathan moved with surprising speed, backing David against the hallway wall. But David had been expecting something like this, and he was ready. Go ahead, Stone. Hit me. Give me a reason to sue you for everything you're worth. Jonathan, don't. Amira grabbed his arm, feeling the tension in his muscles. He's not worth it. For a moment, the three of them stood frozen in tableau, David against the wall, Jonathan poised for violence, Amira between them. Then Jonathan stepped back, his breathing ragged. You're right, he said to Amira. He's not. But as Jonathan moved away, David made a crucial mistake. He reached out and grabbed Amira's wrist, pulling her toward him. Come on, Amira. Don't throw your career away for a man who's already shown you exactly how much you mean to him. The grip was tight enough to hurt, and Amira saw something dangerous flicker in Jonathan's eyes. Let go of her. His voice was deadly quiet. Make me. It happened fast. Jonathan's hand shot out, gripping David's wrist and applying pressure to a nerve point that made him release Amira with a yelp of pain. Touch her again and I'll break your arm, Jonathan said conversationally. David cradled his wrist, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. This isn't over, Stone. And Amira, when he breaks your heart, don't come crying to me. He stalked toward the elevator, but turned back at the last moment. By the way, you might want to be more careful driving in weather like this. Roads are treacherous tonight. The elevator doors closed on his smirk, leaving Jonathan and Amira alone in the hallway. Are you okay? Jonathan asked, gently examining her wrist where David had grabbed her. I'm fine. But Jonathan, what he said about driving was a threat. I know. Jonathan's jaw was tight with anger. That's the kind of man you're dealing with in our world, Amira. That's why I was so afraid of Richard getting his hands on you. They went back into her apartment, both of them shaken by the confrontation. Maya emerged from the back bedroom, having obviously heard everything. Well, she said dryly, that was educational. Maya, I'm sorry. Don't apologize. I'm glad I finally understand what's been going on. Maya looked at Jonathan with new assessment. You really love her. It wasn't a question, but Jonathan answered anyway. More than my own life. And you, Maya turned to her sister, have been miserable for months because you thought he didn't feel the same way. Amira felt heat rise in her cheeks. Maya. No, I'm talking now. You two have spent 3 years dancing around each other, making yourselves miserable, because you were both too scared to be honest about your feelings. And now you're letting other people's threats and manipulations drive your decisions. She crossed her arms and looked between them like a stern teacher addressing wayward students. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to sit down and have an actual conversation about what you want. Not what you think you should want, not what other people expect, but what you actually want. And you're going to figure out how to fight for it together instead of making decisions for each other. Before either of them could respond, Maya's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and frowned. It's Mrs. Rodriguez from downstairs. She only calls if. Maya answered quickly. Hello? What? When? Okay, yes, we'll be right there. She hung up, already moving toward the coat closet. Zoe's sick. High fever. Mrs. Rodriguez is watching her, but I need to get her to the emergency room. I'll drive you, Jonathan said immediately. No, that's okay. Maya, it's pouring rain and you're upset. Let me help. Amira looked at this man who had been the center of her world for 3 years, who had just confessed to loving her, who was now offering to drive her sister and niece to the hospital without hesitation. This was who Jonathan really was beneath the CEO exterior, someone who stepped up when people needed him. Thank you, Maya said simply. I'll get Zoe. As Maya disappeared into the bedroom, Jonathan turned to Amira. Will you come with us? Of course. Good. Because after we make sure Zoe is okay, you and I are going to finish this conversation. They were gathering coats and keys when Jonathan's phone buzzed with an urgent message. His face went pale as he read it. What is it? James. There's been an incident at the office. Someone broke into my private files. Amira felt ice form in her stomach. Richard? Has to be. Which means. Jonathan's eyes met hers, and she saw fear there. He's looking for leverage. Personal information he can use against us. What kind of personal information? Jonathan was quiet for a long moment. Then, letters. Emails I wrote but never sent. 3 years worth of everything I never told you. Before Amira could process the implications of that confession, Maya reappeared carrying a feverish, whimpering Zoe. The hospital, Maya said urgently. Now. They rushed toward the elevators, but as the doors opened, the lights in the building flickered and went out. Emergency lighting kicked in, casting everything in an eerie red glow. Storm must have knocked out power to the grid, Jonathan said. We'll take the stairs. As they hurried down 6 flights of stairs, Zoe's fever-bright eyes focused on Jonathan with the uncanny perception of sick children. Are you the prince? She whispered. Jonathan's expression softened completely. I'm just a friend, sweetheart. We're going to get you to the doctor. Aunt Mira loves you, Zoe said with the devastating honesty of a 6-year-old. Over Zoe's head, Jonathan's eyes found Amira's in the dim emergency lighting. I love her too, he said quietly. They reached the parking garage, where Jonathan's Mercedes waited. As he started the engine, the rain seemed to intensify, drumming against the roof like bullets. Mercy General is closest, Maya said, buckling Zoe into the back seat. Jonathan nodded, pulling out into the storm. The roads were slick with rain and fallen leaves, and visibility was nearly zero. But his hands were steady on the wheel, his focus complete. They were halfway to the hospital when it happened. The other car ran the red light at 60 miles per hour, hitting a patch of standing water and hydroplaning directly into their path. Jonathan had perhaps 2 seconds to react, not enough time to stop, barely enough time to swerve. He yanked the wheel hard to the right, tires screaming against wet asphalt. The Mercedes spun, clipped the median, and rolled. The world became a chaos of breaking glass, screaming metal, and the sensation of falling through space. Amira's last coherent thought before everything went black was that she finally understood what people meant when they said your life flashed before your eyes. But it wasn't her whole life she saw. It was 3 years of stolen glances across an office. 3 years of electric touches and careful conversations. 3 years of love hidden behind professional smiles. 3 years that might have just ended in a twisted wreck of metal and regret. When consciousness returned, it came in fragments. The smell of gasoline and rain. The taste of blood in her mouth. The sound of someone calling her name with desperate urgency. Amira. Amira, can you hear me? She opened her eyes to find herself hanging upside down, held in place by her seatbelt. The Mercedes had rolled and come to rest on its roof, and through the spider-webbed windshield, she could see emergency lights flashing in the distance. Jonathan? Her voice came out as a croak. I'm here. I'm okay. Are you hurt? She took inventory of her body. Everything ached, but nothing seemed broken. I think I'm all right. Maya? Zoe? We're okay, Maya's shaky voice came from the back seat. Zoe's unconscious but breathing. We need to get out of here, I smell gas. The smell of gasoline was getting stronger, and Amira could see liquid pooling on the road outside her window. Jonathan was struggling with his seatbelt, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. My belt's jammed, he said, pulling at the mechanism. Amira managed to release her own seatbelt, dropping awkwardly to what had been the roof of the car. She reached across to help Jonathan, her fingers working at the jammed mechanism while he held his weight. There, she said as the belt finally released. Jonathan dropped down beside her, and for a moment they were face to face in the upside-down car, close enough to share breath. Are you really okay? He asked, his hand cupping her face, thumb brushing away blood from a small cut on her cheek. I'm okay. We need to get Maya and Zoe out. They worked together to free Maya and Zoe from the back seat, Jonathan lifting the unconscious little girl while Amira helped her sister. The smell of gasoline was overwhelming now, and in the distance, Amira could hear sirens. They crawled out through the shattered rear window, Jonathan carrying Zoe while Amira supported a shaky Maya. Once they were clear of the wreckage, Jonathan gently placed Zoe on the grass beside the road, and Maya immediately began checking her daughter's vital signs. She's breathing normally, Maya said, relief evident in her voice. I think she just hit her head when we rolled. The first ambulance arrived within minutes, followed quickly by fire trucks and police cars. As paramedics checked them all for injuries, Amira found herself sitting on the back of an ambulance, watching Jonathan give his statement to a police officer. Even disheveled and bloodied, even in the aftermath of what could have been a fatal accident, he commanded attention. But when he finished with the officer and looked around, his eyes searched until they found her. He crossed to the ambulance where she sat, ignoring the paramedic who was trying to clean the cut on his forehead. Sir, I need you to stay still while I... In a minute. Jonathan's attention was completely focused on Amira. How are you feeling? Like I was just in a car accident, she said, attempting levity. But alive. Thank God. He sat down beside her on the ambulance bumper, and she could feel him trembling slightly. When I saw that other car coming, when I realized I couldn't stop in time, all I could think about was that I'd never told you how much you mean to me. You told me tonight. In my apartment. Not everything. Not even close to everything. The paramedic finally succeeded in getting Jonathan to hold still long enough to clean his wounds, but his eyes never left Amira's face. Mr. Stone? Another paramedic approached. We're going to transport all of you to Mercy General for observation. Head injuries can be tricky, even minor ones. As they prepared to leave for the hospital, Amira realized something that made her laugh despite everything. What? Jonathan asked, concerned. We're going to the hospital anyway. Zoe's fever, the accident. Maybe this was the universe's way of making sure we got there. Jonathan smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him all evening. Maybe it was the universe's way of making sure I finally stopped being a coward about how I feel about you. As they loaded into the ambulance, Maya and Zoe in one, Jonathan and Amira in another. Amira felt something shift inside her chest. The accident had changed everything and nothing. They were still the same people with the same obstacles, but something about facing the possibility of losing each other had crystallized what really mattered. The choices we make when everything's on the line reveal who we really are. What would you risk for love? Drop a heart emoji if you believe some connections are worth fighting for, and don't forget to subscribe if you're loving these passionate stories of the heart. At Mercy General, Dr. Dorothy Hayes was just finishing her shift when the ambulances arrived. At 55, she'd seen enough trauma to know when injuries were serious and when families were just shaken up. What caught her attention wasn't the minor cuts and bruises, but the way the man in the expensive suit watched the woman with natural curls, as if she might disappear if he looked away for even a second. "I'm Dr. Hayes," she introduced herself as she examined Amira's pupils with a small flashlight. "Any dizziness? Nausea? Blurred vision?" "No, nothing like that. I feel fine, really." Dr. Hayes moved to check Jonathan's head wound, noting how he sat close enough to Amira to touch her if he needed to, but kept his hands carefully to himself. "You're lucky," she told them both. "Cars that roll usually result in much more serious injuries." "How's the little girl?" Jonathan asked immediately. "She's fine. The fever broke, probably from the shock and adrenaline. Her mother's with her now. You can see them in a few minutes." As Dr. Hayes cleaned and bandaged the cut on Jonathan's forehead, she found herself studying the dynamics between him and Amira. In 30 years of emergency medicine, she'd learned to read relationships quickly: who was family, who was a friend, who was more than they were admitting. These two were definitely more than they were admitting. "So," she said conversationally as she worked, "are you two?" "He's my boss," Amira said quickly. "Former boss." "Former?" Dr. Hayes raised an eyebrow. "It's complicated," Jonathan said, wincing as she applied antiseptic. "It usually is." Dr. Hayes finished bandaging his forehead and stepped back. "You know, in my experience, near-death experiences have a way of clarifying what's really important. Life's too short to waste time on complicated when your heart knows what it wants." She left them alone in the examination room, ostensibly to check on her other patients, but really to give them space to process what had just happened to them. "She's right," Amira said quietly. "About what?" "Life being too short." She turned to face him fully. "Jonathan, when that car was coming toward us, when I thought we might die, I wasn't thinking about my job or my career or what people might say about us. I was thinking about all the time we'd wasted being careful." Jonathan reached for her hand, interlacing their fingers. "What were you thinking?" "That I love you. Not the professional version of you, not the CEO, but you. The man who works 16-hour days but still remembers to ask about James's wife. Who notices when I'm having a bad day and finds excuses to make me smile. Who just risked his life to get a sick child to the hospital." "Amira." "I'm not finished." She squeezed his hand. "I was also thinking about Richard Webb, and your mother, and David, and all the people who are going to have opinions about us. And I realized I don't care anymore. I'm tired of letting other people's expectations dictate my choices." Jonathan brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that if you want to fight for this, for us, then I'm in. Whatever it takes, whatever the consequences, I'm in." For the first time in 3 years, Jonathan Stone's careful control cracked completely. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, his face buried in her hair. "I thought I'd lost you," he whispered. "In the car, when we were rolling, I thought I'd lost any chance of telling you how much I love you. You didn't lose me. I'm right here." They held each other in the sterile hospital room, surrounded by the smell of antiseptic and the distant sounds of medical equipment, and it felt like the most romantic moment of Amira's life. When they finally pulled apart, Jonathan cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. "About those files Richard broke into, about the emails I never sent." "Jonathan, it's okay." "No, it's not okay. Because if he has them, he's going to use them against us. Against you." His voice was rough with emotion. "They're explicit, Amira. Not just about my feelings, but about what I wanted to do with you, to you. How I imagined it would be between us." Heat flooded her cheeks, but not from embarrassment. From want. "Show me." "What?" "When we leave here, when we make sure Maya and Zoe are settled, show me these emails. Show me everything you never told me." The look in Jonathan's eyes could have melted steel. "Amira, if I show you those emails, there's no going back to the way things were." "Good," she said simply. "I don't want to go back." Chapter 4. 2 hours later, they were back at Jonathan's penthouse. Maya and Zoe had been released with clean bills of health. Zoe's fever had indeed broken, and her brief unconsciousness had been nothing more than exhaustion. Maya had insisted they didn't need company for the night, shooting Amira a meaningful look that clearly said, "Go with him." Now Amira stood in Jonathan's living room, taking in the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of the city, the expensive art that adorned the walls, the subtle luxury that spoke of old money and refined taste. This was his world, a world so far removed from her modest Brooklyn apartment that it might as well have been another planet. "Having second thoughts?" Jonathan asked quietly. He'd changed into jeans and a sweater, and somehow the casual clothes made him seem more accessible, more real. "No," she said, and meant it. "I'm just processing. A few hours ago, I thought you'd fired me because I meant nothing to you. Now I'm standing in your home about to read love letters you've been writing to me for 3 years. Jonathan moved to a wall safe hidden behind a painting, not the Monet she'd expected, but a smaller piece that looked like original Van Gogh. His hands shook slightly as he entered the combination. "I need you to understand," he said without turning around, "these weren't written with the intention of anyone ever reading them. They were therapy, I guess. A way to deal with feelings I couldn't act on." "I understand." He pulled out a thick manila folder and turned to face her. "They start about 6 months after you began working for me. That's when I knew I was in trouble." He handed her the folder, and she could feel the weight of 3 years' worth of suppressed emotion in her hands. "I'm going to make some coffee," he said. "Take your time." But Amira was already opening the folder, her heart pounding as she saw her name at the top of the first email. To Amira Smith. From Jonathan Stone. Subject, unsent, things I can't say. Amira. Today you wore that blue dress, the one that makes your eyes look like warm honey. You probably don't know that I noticed, just like you probably don't know that I've memorized every outfit in your wardrobe. That sounds obsessive, and maybe it is, but I can't help myself. When you leaned over my desk to show me the quarterly reports, I caught a hint of your perfume, something light and floral that made me want to bury my face in your neck and breathe you in. Instead, I sat there like a statue, pretending to focus on profit margins when all I could think about was how badly I wanted to kiss you. This is insane. You're my employee. You trust me to be professional, to maintain appropriate boundaries, and here I am writing emails about wanting to kiss you. But God help me, Amira, I'm falling in love with you, and I don't know how to stop. Jonathan. Amira's breath caught in her throat. The email was dated just 8 months after she'd started working for him. She flipped to the next one. To Amira Smith. From Jonathan Stone. Subject, unsent, sleepless. It's 2 a.m. and I can't sleep because I keep thinking about what happened in the conference room today. When that client made that inappropriate comment about your appearance, I wanted to throw him out the window. The effort it took to remain professional, to respond with corporate diplomacy instead of violence, left me shaking. No one gets to talk about you that way. No one gets to look at you like you're anything less than the brilliant, extraordinary woman you are. But I couldn't say that without revealing how I feel about you, so I sat there and made polite conversation while imagining what it would feel like to have the right to defend you publicly. What would it be like to introduce you as my girlfriend? My partner? To be able to put my arm around you and make it clear to every man in the room that you're taken? To come home to you every night instead of this empty penthouse? I'm losing my mind, and you have no idea. Jonathan. With each email, the confessions became more intimate, more revealing. He wrote about watching her laugh with James and feeling jealous of the easy friendship she had with his driver. About the time she'd gotten caught in the rain and arrived at work with her hair curly and wild, and how he'd had to excuse himself from a meeting because he couldn't concentrate on anything but how beautiful she looked. There were emails about business trips where he'd found excuses to bring her along, just so he could have more time with her. About late nights at the office when they'd worked side by side, and how the empty building had felt charged with possibility. To Amira Smith. From Jonathan Stone. Subject, unsent, the night we almost. I keep replaying last night in my mind. Working late on the Morrison contract, just the two of us in the office. When you fell asleep at your desk, I should have woken you up, should have sent you home. Instead, I stood there watching you sleep, memorizing the way you looked in the soft light from your computer screen. When you woke up and found me standing there, for a moment, just a moment, I thought you might feel it too. The way you looked at me, the way your lips parted slightly, like you were waiting for something. I was so close to kissing you, Amira. So close to throwing away 3 years of careful control and just taking what I wanted. But then you stepped back, smiled that professional smile, and said goodnight. And I let you go, because what else could I do? How could I risk everything we have for something that might only exist in my imagination? But it felt real. In that moment, it felt like you wanted me too. Did you? Do you ever think about what would happen if we stopped pretending this is just business? Jonathan. Amira remembered that night. She remembered waking up to find him standing close enough to touch, remembered the way her heart had hammered when she saw the look in his eyes. She'd wanted him to kiss her so badly it had physically hurt to step away. She flipped through more emails, hundreds of them. Some were short, just a few lines about how seeing her smile had made his day. Others were longer, more detailed fantasies about a life where they were free to be together. There were emails about his growing love for her, about how she'd changed him from a man who only thought about business into someone who wanted a real life, a real relationship. Emails about the small acts of kindness she performed without thinking, remembering James's wife's surgery, sending flowers to a colleague's mother, organizing a baby shower for a woman in accounting. To Amira Smith. From Jonathan Stone. Subject, unsent, Why I Love You. Today I realized something that terrifies me. I don't just want you, Amira. I love you. Completely, desperately, irrevocably. I love the way you bite your lip when you're concentrating. I love how you remember everyone's birthdays and coffee preferences. I love that you challenge me when you think I'm making a mistake, even though I'm your boss. I love your laugh, not the polite one you use in meetings, but the real one, the one that makes your whole face light up. I love how you care for your sister and Zoe, how you put their needs before your own without question. I love that you earned your MBA through night school while working full-time, that you've built a career through sheer determination and brilliance. I love your integrity, your warmth, your strength. I love the way you make me want to be a better man. But mostly, I love you for seeing past the CEO, past the money and the reputation, to whatever's left of the real me underneath. You treat me like a person, not a title, and that's something I'd almost forgotten was possible. I'm so in love with you it's destroying me. And I can never tell you. Jonathan. By the time she reached the last email, dated just 2 weeks ago, tears were streaming down her face. Jonathan had poured his heart onto these pages, had laid himself bare in a way that took her breath away. The final email was the longest, a detailed fantasy about what their life could be like together, and it was so beautiful and heartfelt that she had to put it down for a moment to compose herself. "Amira?" Jonathan's voice came from the kitchen doorway. "Are you okay?" She looked up at him through her tears, and saw her own emotion reflected in his eyes. He was terrified, she realized. Terrified that reading his private thoughts would change how she felt about him. "Jonathan," she whispered. They're beautiful." Relief flooded his face. "You're not horrified? You don't think I'm? I think you're the most romantic man who's ever lived." She stood up, still clutching the folder. "And I think we've wasted enough time." She crossed the room to him, and for the first time in 3 years, there were no professional boundaries between them. No carefully maintained distance. No reasons to hold back. "I love you too," she said, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. "I love you so much that reading these emails felt like coming home." Jonathan's hands covered hers, and she could feel him trembling. "Are you sure? Because once we crossed this line. We crossed the line the day we met, Jonathan. We've just been pretending we didn't." He kissed her then, and it was everything 3 years of waiting had promised it would be. Gentle at first, almost reverent, as if he couldn't quite believe she was really there, really his. But when she responded, when her arms wound around his neck and she pressed closer, the kiss deepened into something that spoke of desperate longing finally unleashed. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jonathan rested his forehead against hers. "I've dreamed about this for so long," he whispered. "Show me," she said. "Show me everything you dreamed about." The look he gave her could have set the city on fire. Without a word, he took her hand and led her through the penthouse, past the living room with its spectacular view, past the formal dining room, to a hallway lined with family portraits. "These are my grandparents," he said, pausing before a formal portrait of a distinguished couple. "They were married for 62 years. My grandmother used to say that real love wasn't about finding someone perfect, it was about finding someone whose imperfections fit perfectly with yours." "What are your imperfections?" Amira asked, studying his profile in the dim hallway lighting. "I'm obsessive. Controlling. I have trust issues from growing up in a world where everyone wants something from you." He turned to look at her. "I'm terrified that if you really knew me, not the polished CEO version, but the real me, you'd realize you deserve better." "And what are mine?" "You don't have any," he said simply. Amira laughed. "That's not true and you know it. I'm stubborn. I have abandonment issues from growing up in foster care. I put everyone else's needs before my own to the point where I forget I have needs. And I've been in love with my boss for 3 years, which shows questionable judgment." "The best judgment," Jonathan corrected, pulling her closer. "Because I've been in love with my secretary for 3 years, and that makes us either crazy or meant to be. I vote for meant to be." He led her further down the hallway to his bedroom, a space that was somehow both luxurious and comfortable, with warm wood furniture and soft lighting that made everything feel intimate. "Amira," he said, suddenly uncertain. "We don't have to, just because we're here doesn't mean." She silenced him with a kiss, pouring 3 years of longing into it. When they broke apart, she looked into his storm-gray eyes and saw her own future reflected there. "I want this," she said simply. "I want you. All of you." What followed was a dance of discovery that had been 3 years in the making. Every touch was reverent, every kiss a confession. Jonathan worshipped her like she was something precious and fragile, and Amira gave herself to him with a completeness that left them both shaken. Afterward, they lay tangled together in his bed, the city lights painting patterns on the ceiling above them. Amira's head was on Jonathan's chest, and she could feel his heartbeat gradually slowing to match hers. "No going back now," she said softly. No going back, he agreed, his fingers combing through her hair. Are you okay with that? More than okay. She lifted her head to look at him. But Jonathan, we need to talk about the practical things. Richard, your mother, the company. I know. His arm tightened around her. And I have a plan. What kind of plan? The kind that involves making you my partner in every sense of the word. Business and personal. Amira raised an eyebrow. What are you saying? I'm saying that Stone Industries needs a chief operating officer. Someone brilliant and capable who knows the company inside and out. Someone who's essentially been doing the job anyway, just without the title or the salary. Jonathan. And I'm saying that the CEO of Stone Industries needs a partner who challenges him, who makes him better, who reminds him that there's more to life than quarterly reports and board meetings. Amira felt tears prick her eyes. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you everything. The job, the partnership, my heart, my life, all of it. If you want it. Before she could answer, his phone rang. Jonathan glanced at the screen and frowned. It's James. He wouldn't call this late unless, he answered immediately. James, what is it? Amira could hear the urgency in James's voice through the phone, though she couldn't make out the words. Jonathan's expression grew darker with each passing moment. When? How bad? Okay, yes, we'll be there in 20 minutes. He hung up and turned to Amira with grim eyes. Richard broke into the office tonight. He didn't just access my computer, he trashed it. And he left a message. What kind of message? The kind that makes it clear this is war. They dressed quickly, the intimate mood shattered by the intrusion of the outside world. As they drove through the empty city streets towards Stone Industries, Amira found herself thinking about what Jonathan had said about partnerships and challenges. Whatever Richard has planned, she said, we face it together. Jonathan reached over and took her hand. Together. The Stone Industries building was lit up like a Christmas tree despite the late hour. Police cars lined the street outside, and Amira could see investigators moving around the 42nd floor through the windows. James met them in the lobby, his usually composed demeanor shaken. How bad is it? Jonathan asked immediately. Bad. He destroyed your computer, scattered papers everywhere, broke the safe, though he didn't get into it. But Mr. Stone, that's not the worst part. What's the worst part? James handed him a piece of paper. He left this on your desk. Jonathan read it, his face going white. Without a word, he handed it to Amira. Jonathan. By now you've probably figured out that I have copies of your pathetic love letters. What you haven't figured out is that I also have photos of you and your little secretary at the hospital tonight, looking very cozy for two people with a purely professional relationship. Here's how this is going to work, you're going to sign the merger agreement, or I'm going to destroy both of you. The emails will go to every major business publication in the city, along with a story about how the great Jonathan Stone has been sexually harassing his employee for years. The photos will support my narrative. Your choice, your company or your girl. You can't have both. Tick-tock, Richard. Amira felt sick. He's going to make it look like you were harassing me. No one will believe that, Jonathan said, but his voice lacked conviction. Won't they? Amira thought about the corporate world they lived in, about how quickly rumors spread and reputations were destroyed. Jonathan, if he spins this right, if he presents those emails as evidence of a pattern of inappropriate behavior, it would destroy my credibility. And yours. Jonathan's hands clenched into fists. Son of a bitch. Mr. Stone, James said quietly, there's something else. The security footage from tonight, Richard wasn't alone. He had help from someone with access to the building. Who? We don't know yet. But whoever it was knew exactly where to find your private files. Amira felt a chill of realization. Someone who knows the building layout, who has access after hours, who would benefit from seeing you brought down. Jonathan's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it and his expression turned to stone. What? Amira asked. It's from my mother. She wants to see me first thing in the morning. Says we have important family business to discuss. The pieces clicked into place in Amira's mind. She knows. Your mother knows what Richard is planning. Worse than that, Jonathan said grimly. I think she's part of it. The next morning dawned gray and cold, matching Amira's mood as she sat in her Brooklyn apartment trying to process everything that had happened in the past 24 hours. She'd gone from fired secretary to love confession to car accident to the most incredible night of her life to corporate espionage, all in the span of 18 hours. Maya was in the kitchen making breakfast, Zoe coloring at the table, both of them pretending not to notice that Amira was wearing the same clothes she'd left in the night before. So, Maya said carefully, setting a cup of coffee in front of her sister, do you want to talk about it? I don't even know where to start. Start with whether you're happy. Amira thought about the question seriously. Despite everything, the threats, the uncertainty, the feeling that her world was about to implode, she was happy. For the first time in 3 years, she knew exactly where she stood with Jonathan. The pretending was over. Yes, she said. I'm happy. Terrified, but happy. Good. Because you deserve to be happy, even if some people are going to try to make you miserable for it. Amira's phone rang. Jonathan's name flashed on the screen, and she answered immediately. How did it go with your mother? About as well as expected. His voice was tight with anger. She confirmed what we suspected. She's been working with Richard for months, feeding him information about the company and about us. Why would she do that? Because she's convinced that you're after my money, that you're a gold digger who's manipulating me. She thinks she's protecting me. Amira felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. And you told her she was wrong? I told her a lot of things. Most of which I probably shouldn't repeat in front of Zoe. There was a pause. Amira, I need you to know that whatever happens next, whatever Richard threatens or my mother says, none of it changes how I feel about you. I know. I feel the same way. Good. Because I have a plan, and it's going to require you to trust me completely. What kind of plan? The kind that involves a press conference this afternoon. I'm going public with everything, our relationship, Richard's blackmail attempt, my mother's betrayal. I'm going to control the narrative before he can. Amira felt her heart rate spike. Jonathan, that's incredibly risky. If it backfires. If it backfires, I lose my company. But if I don't try, I lose you. And that's not acceptable. You won't lose me. No matter what happens, you won't lose me. Promise me. I promise. That afternoon, Amira stood at the back of the Stone Industries conference room, watching Jonathan command the attention of 50 reporters and business journalists. He looked every inch the powerful CEO. Expensive suit, confident posture, the kind of presence that made people lean forward to hear what he had to say. But she could see the slight tremor in his hands, could read the tension in his shoulders. He was about to risk everything on a gamble that their love was stronger than corporate politics and family expectations. Ladies and gentlemen, Jonathan began, I've called this press conference to address some rumors that have been circulating about Stone Industries and about my personal life. I believe in transparency, and I think it's time to set the record straight. He looked directly at Amira, and she saw him draw strength from her presence. For the past 3 years, I've had the privilege of working with the most extraordinary woman I've ever met. Amira Smith has been my executive assistant, my right hand, and my closest advisor. She's also the woman I'm in love with. A murmur went through the crowd of reporters, cameras flashing as they captured his confession. Recently, I made the mistake of letting outside pressure influence my decisions. I terminated Ms. Smith's employment, not because of her performance, which was exemplary, but because I was being blackmailed by a business rival who threatened to destroy her reputation if I didn't comply with his demands. Jonathan pulled out copies of Richard's messages, distributing them to the reporters. Richard Webb has been attempting to force a merger between our companies through threats and intimidation. When I refused to capitulate, he escalated to breaking into my offices and stealing private correspondence. He's threatened to twist that correspondence to make it appear that I was engaging in sexual harassment. A reporter in the front row raised her hand. Mr. Stone, are you saying that your relationship with Ms. Smith was consensual? I'm saying that my relationship with Ms. Smith is the best thing that's ever happened to me, and I refuse to let anyone use it as a weapon against either of us. Jonathan looked back at Amira again, and this time he smiled, the real smile, the one that transformed his entire face. Amira Smith is not my victim. She's my partner, my equal, and if she'll have me, she's going to be my wife. The conference room erupted. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed continuously, and Amira felt the world tilt on its axis for the second time in 24 hours. Marriage. He was talking about marriage. Through the chaos, she heard her phone buzzing. Richard Webb's name flashed on the screen, and she answered it without thinking. Enjoying the show? Richard's voice was venomous. Very much. He just destroyed his reputation for you. Was it worth it? Amira looked at Jonathan, who was fielding questions with calm professionalism, turning every attempt to sensationalize their relationship into a testament to her character and abilities. Yes, she said simply. It was. We'll see about that. The line went dead, but Amira wasn't worried. Richard had overplayed his hand, banking on shame and secrecy to give him power over them. By bringing everything into the light, Jonathan had neutered his biggest weapons. The press conference continued for another hour, with Jonathan methodically dismantling Richard's credibility and presenting evidence of corporate sabotage. By the time it was over, the narrative had shifted completely. Instead of a story about harassment, it had become a story about true love triumphing over corruption. As the last reporter filed out, Jonathan crossed the room to Amira, ignoring the lingering cameras and the handful of staff members still present. So, he said, taking her hands in his, what do you say? Will you marry me? Is that an official proposal? Do you want it to be? Amira looked around the conference room where she'd spent countless hours, where she'd fallen in love with this man, where he'd just risked everything to protect their future together. Ask me again, she said. Properly this time. Jonathan smiled and dropped to one knee, right there in front of God and everyone. He pulled a ring box from his jacket pocket, when had he had time to buy a ring, and opened it to reveal a stunning diamond that caught the light and threw rainbows across the walls. Amira Smith, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, you've been my partner in every way that mattered for 3 years. Will you make it official? Will you marry me? Yes, she said, tears streaming down her face. Yes, of course, yes. The remaining staff members burst into applause as Jonathan slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her thoroughly. When they broke apart, Amira became aware that James was standing nearby, grinning like he'd just won the lottery. How long have you known, she asked him, that he was going to propose? Since this morning when he asked me to pick up the ring. James's smile widened. That he was in love with you? Since the day you started working here. 6 months later, Amira Stone, she still couldn't quite believe the name, stood on the rooftop garden of their penthouse, looking out at the city lights below. The wedding had been small and perfect, just family and close friends, with Zoe as flower girl and Maya as maid of honor. Stone Industries was thriving under their joint leadership. The board had unanimously approved her promotion to Chief Operating Officer, and together she and Jonathan had implemented changes that had increased both profits and employee satisfaction. Richard Webb was facing multiple criminal charges for corporate espionage and harassment. His own company was in shambles, several major clients having jumped ship when the story broke. Lillian Stone had eventually come around, though it had taken months of family therapy and some very difficult conversations. She was still learning to see Amira as a daughter-in-law rather than a threat, but progress was being made. "Penny for your thoughts," Jonathan said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Just thinking about how much has changed in 6 months. Any regrets?" Amira leaned back against his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady and strong against her shoulder blades. "Only one." "What's that?" "I regret that we waited so long to stop being scared." Jonathan turned her in his arms, and in the soft light from the garden lanterns, she could see the love in his eyes that had been there all along, hidden behind professional courtesy and careful distance. "We had to wait," he said. "We weren't ready before. We needed time to grow into the people who could handle this kind of love." "This kind of love?" "The kind that changes everything. The kind that's worth fighting for." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise, with the city spread out below them like a carpet of stars. When they broke apart, Amira thought about the journey that had brought them here, from that first day when she'd walked into his office and reorganized his filing system, through 3 years of longing and professional restraint, to a car accident that had finally shown them what really mattered. "I love you, Mrs. Stone," Jonathan whispered against her lips. "I love you too, Mr. Stone." And in that moment, surrounded by the lights of the city where they'd found each other, Amira knew that every moment of waiting, every obstacle they'd overcome, every risk they'd taken, had been worth it. Because this love that had grown in secret and bloomed in public, this partnership that had survived corporate espionage and family disapproval, this marriage that had begun with a confession in a conference room, this was what happy endings were made of. True love isn't about perfect timing, it's about perfect courage. When have you found the courage to be completely vulnerable with someone? Share your story with our community below. Like this video if it touched your heart, subscribe for more passionate love stories, and remember, your worth isn't determined by others' recognition, but by your courage to love authentically. In her small apartment in Brooklyn, Maya was tucking Zoe into bed when her daughter asked, "Did Aunt Mira really marry the prince?" "She did, baby. She really did. And they lived happily ever after?" Maya smiled, thinking about her sister's transformation from heartbroken and unemployed to radiant and loved, thinking about the way Jonathan looked at Amira like she hung the moon. "Yeah, sweetheart. They really did. Because sometimes, if you're very lucky and very brave, fairy tales do come true. Sometimes the prince turns out to be real, and sometimes love really does conquer all. And sometimes, if you're patient enough and strong enough to wait for the right person, you get your happily ever after. Even if it takes 3 years and a car accident to get there."